Hagopian teaches ethnic studies and is the co-advisor of the Black Student Union at Garfield High School. I highly, highly advise if you ever go to Seattle to go to this historic high school. It's absolutely amazing, from the students to the architecture to the artwork to the faculty. So you should definitely put that on your stop if you ever visit. In addition to education, Jesse also organizes with NFL Pro Bowlers like Michael Bennett and other professional athletes who protest injustice. In fact, Jesse joined the organizing team of Athletes for Impact, a group that is dedicated to bringing together athletes in the struggles for social justice. Jesse is a founding member of the Social Equity Educators, a recipient of the 2012 A. Keller Foundation Award for Excellence in Innovation and Peace Education, won the 2013 Secondary School Teacher of the Year Award, and the Special Achievement for Courageous Leadership Award from the Academy of Education, Arts, and Sciences. In 2015, Jesse received the Seattle King County NAACP Service Award, was named Education Fellow to Progressive Magazine. The reality is, I could go on and on about Jesse's accomplishments. He has appeared essentially on every news show you could possibly think of. He's published in numerous outlets. I first met Jesse when I was asked to go out to Seattle to do a book signing and talk for my research and my work, and Jesse was kind enough to ask me to go into his classroom and teach there. And what impressed me about Jesse was not just his dedication to his students and watching how his students responded to him, but also it was very evident that Jesse is not new to this fight. He isn't just some social media activist that just got woke when Black Lives Matter appeared on the scene. He's been in this fight his whole life. Teaching, activism, social justice, these are things that are in Jesse's DNA, these are his passions, which is probably why me and your professor, Dave Zirin, and Jesse all get along so well. Justice and civic engagement to the overall goals as an institution, MC is deeply invested in the mission of social justice, which is why it is my absolute pleasure to introduce activist, teacher, writer, and my friend, Jesse Hagopian.
Right on. Thank you. Appreciate that, man. Wow, it's so great to be with you all, especially since this is more like an exchange. Like Vincent, Professor Antondi has been to my classroom and taught my students, and Professor Zirin has been in my classroom and taught my students, and to get to give back like this, it feels special to me. So I appreciate the invitation. And it's also great to be here because this is where I started teaching in Washington, D.C. So I'm coming back to my roots, I feel like, of where this whole journey in my life really began. I started teaching in Anacostia in Southeast DC, and actually I got more of an education than I gave teaching over there. You know, I mean, it was incredible to me to get to drive by the White House and then 10 minutes later be in an area that I never understood really existed in this country, to be in a place that's completely forsaken by anyone with power or influence or money, right? To be in a school building where the first assignment I ever assigned, a research project on someone these students would admire from history, and I couldn't grade the assignment because I came in on Monday and all their posters that they had spent, this is a 5th grade classroom, all the posters they had created were destroyed because it rained into my classroom and waterlogged them, and standing water all over the floor, right? You know, no basketball court, you know, just piled up incinerated cars in the empty lot next to the school. 100% African American, completely segregated school here in the seat of world power. And that, what I learned teaching there that year, you know, I started in 2001, and so it was only a couple weeks into the school year when 9/11 happened, and we saw the smoke rising from the Pentagon across the way. It was terrifying. But one of the lessons I learned teaching there that year was that our country could immediately mobilize untold fortune, right? Hundreds of billions of dollars to go bomb people halfway around the world, but they couldn't fix the hole in the ceiling of my classroom right down the street from the White House, right? And so what I learned about the priorities of our society and the way institutional racism is embedded in our society and in our school system, I think really launched me on this path to help to build this movement for Black lives in our schools that I'm going to talk more about today. And I think it couldn't be more obvious and evident that we desperately need resources like Teaching for Black Lives and a movement for Black lives to transform the education system. When you look at things like Kanye West's tweet last night, did you see that? You missed it? A couple people saw it. Kanye West's tweet last night that he called for abolishing the 13th Amendment, right, as a jobs program in America. And it's the utter confusion about Black history that is on display in his mind is horrifying. But when you look at what's taught in the schools, you can kind of maybe you can understand him a little bit more, right? I mean, maybe he was talking about the loophole in the 13th Amendment that allows for slavery to exist if you're convicted of a crime. But that's not how he put it. He just said, let's abolish the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, right? The total confusion of people in power, it shows, I think, how necessary it is to engage in these conversations. People saw Trump last year during Black History Month try to talk about Black history. You remember that? The Frederick Douglass? Let me see. I wrote it down. He said, Frederick Douglass is an example of somebody who's done an amazing job and is getting recognized more and more, I noticed. Come on. Frederick Douglass was an abolitionist who died a long time ago in the but talking about him in the present tense, Frederick Douglass's family wrote a history lesson for Trump they delivered to him. You should check out that essay. But it's really incredible how little is taught about the contributions and the struggle of Black people in the schools and the way that the schools are organized around reproducing institutional racism. You know, my time at Henley Elementary in Anacostia, you know, I would see police officers roaming the halls in my elementary school, grabbing students, jacking them up against the wall like a fourth grader, kicking his feet in, screaming. And, you know, one day I came to school and there was a kid in handcuffs in the back seat of a police car, and the officer was saying, I arrested your dad last week and you're going to be next if you don't get it together. And just the complete disregard for Black lives that is happening across the country and schools everywhere, I think is why this movement has erupted. And I want to talk to you about this movement, where it came from and what the goals of this movement are, and the changes we're beginning to make, and our hopes for this year's action that I think everyone in this room can be a part of in the upcoming week of action in February that we're planning. So that's what we're going to move towards in this conversation. If I can get to the next slide. There we go. So Malcolm X made it clear what we're missing in school when he said, when we send our children to school in this country, they learn nothing about us other than we used to be cotton pickers. Why, your grandfather was Nat Turner, your grandfather was Toussaint Louverture, your grandfather was Hannibal. He might have added, your grandmother was Harriet Tubman or Angela Davis or, right, so many other. Sojourner Truth. There you go, right? And so let's look at the textbooks that Malcolm X critiqued and that still need to be critiqued today. I don't know if anyone saw this story about the McGraw-Hill textbook in Texas 2 years ago. Pretty amazing story. So this textbook had a passage, and this boy, Kobe Buren, was sitting in his 12th grade geography class reading his textbook, and he came across this passage. The Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. And so he noticed that instead of talking about the enslavement and kidnapping of African people, they said workers, which implies that someone was getting paid. It was a job. And in fact, when you read the rest of the text of the book, it never explains that this was forced, unfree, unpaid labor. And so he texted his mom this. We was real hard workers, wasn't we? The little sarcastic emoji. And his mom was a history teacher getting her PhD in history, and she wasn't playing around. She took to Facebook, and if you haven't seen this video of her going through this textbook, reading out the names of the editors who signed off on this, all these guys with PhDs who allowed this book into print, teaching students that to erase slavery. It's a pretty amazing Facebook message. But there's something worse than just the fact that they replaced the word slave with workers about this. It's the whole approach to teaching slavery, in that they put the chapter on slavery in the section of the book on immigration.
Oh my God.
As if black people got in the bottom of a filthy slave ship and came here looking for a better life, right? To equate the forced enslavement and disruption of African society with immigration, right, was the real crime, I think. And so the textbook company, because of Kobe's mother right here, her activism, wrote an apology and changed the online version where getting rid of the word worker and talking about slaves, but it's still in the section on immigration, which sends a whole message to youth growing up today, right? Now, okay, some people see this and they're like, okay, that's Texas. Of course, they're gonna have this kind of backwards ideology. Let's look at the North. Let's look at what students are learning in Connecticut. This textbook was used all the way up through last year in Connecticut. Let's take a look at what students are learning about Connecticut history. So this is the homework assignment that a 4th grade girl came home in Connecticut with. And she originally wrote, slaves were treated badly and cruelly and were treated like animals and goods. But then you see she crossed it out. And then she wrote, slaves were treated like members of the family. And her mom saw this homework assignment and was horrified. Wait a second, why did you cross out that they were treated badly and cruelly and then say they were treated like members of the family? And she said, Mom, obviously I got it wrong. Here's the textbook passage. Connecticut did not have many slaves. Some people owned 1 or 2 slaves. They often cared for and protected them like members of the family. They taught them to be Christian and sometimes to read and write. Sounds like they're doing us a favor here, right? I mean, this is what generations of people grew up using in the Connecticut public schools up until a movement was built and it was finally pushed out of the schools last year. Okay? And this just happened. Did people hear about this school where this went all over Twitter? This kid came back with a homework assignment where his teacher asked him to list both the positive and negative aspects of slavery, the life of slaves, a balanced view, right? So this student clearly passed the test because NA is under the positive aspects, right? Here we have a young freedom fighter and being birthed here, okay? But I mean, this outrageous assignment from a teacher to ask his class to list all the positive things that slavery provided people is really atrocious. But then when you go and look at the textbook, you can see the problem isn't just that we have individual clueless teachers or racist teachers. The problem is systemic and institutional, and it comes from corporate textbooks that want to reproduce a narrative in our country that we are the land of the free and really always have been. Maybe we've had a couple flaws, but we always persevere, and in the end, we have the best, freest nation on earth. And so, you know, it complicates it. The institution was as complex as the people involved. Though most slaves were whipped at some point in their lives, a few never felt the lash, nor did all slaves work in the fields, right? I mean, there's this whole tone.
The next line.
Right? Yeah. Some were house servants or skilled artisans. Many may have not even been terribly unhappy. Right? So this book is still in circulation from Prentice Hall. Okay? So this is the conditions that lead to people fighting back, that the movement that I'm a part of. So, but it isn't just black minds that are under assault in our school systems across the country. It's also black bodies. And one of the sharpest edges of that is school push-out, the suspensions and expulsions of schools, and the vastly disproportionate rates of suspensions that occur against black students and students of color. And so nationally, it's off the charts. This is the slides from my city of Seattle. Okay, so you can see this is grades 5, kindergarten through 5th grade. You can see that black students are dramatically more suspended than white students, and this is 6 through 12. They're 7 times more the rate of white students. And the most disproportionate suspension rates are actually of black girls in this country. And you only have to think of what happened to Serena Williams to understand why, right? The way that black women and black girls get labeled angry and defiant when they have this, you know, slightest critique of what something going wrong in our society. And so black girls, I think this is even outdated, that it's 7 times or more the rate of white girls in this across the country. And there's an amazing book that I highly recommend people read called Push Out: The Criminalization of Black Girls in Schools by Monique Morris. She has a interview in the book Teaching for Black Lives that you all have that's really worth reading about the way black girls get labeled angry and defiant, and that's used to push them out of the classroom. I said black bodies are under assault as well. It's not just the pushing out of kids from school, it's also the police officers in the school and how they treat black and brown bodies. And so of the 5 largest school districts in the nation, 3 have more officers than counselors, right? And actually, you have 1.6 million students attend schools that have school police but not a counselor across this country. Okay, and what happens when you have police officers in schools? Here's an example of one description of this school to prison pipeline and what it feels like. Schools seem like a prison. You have police, you have all these security guards, there are security cameras everywhere. You go in your class and even outside the bathroom, they treat you like you're always about to do something. It feels like everyone has it out for you. Student from my county in Washington State. And you know, in the past 20 years, we've added 17,000 police officers to the public schools across the country, and the impact is real on our kids' lives. Both the monetary right? 62,000 to 125,000 per full-time equivalent officer, and that means that we can invest, millions of dollars in policing our students. But what about lowering class size? What about getting culturally relevant curriculum? And what about training for our teachers and fixing the basic facilities? All things that would dramatically reduce disturbances in our school. What about hiring counselors to actually get at the root causes of the trauma our kids are facing, rather than just brutalize them with police when an infraction is caught, right? So these are some of the things in my home county that students have been picked up by police for. Discharging fart spray, arrest them, right? These are things that you used to go to the office and have to call your mom. Mom, I discharged fart spray in school today. Okay, I'll come get you, right? No. Now it's you. Now the student is charged with a felony assault, right? And the police officer deals with that. Pouring chocolate milk on a student now is an assault in Pierce County, rather than something that the school would handle like it, had done for a long time before police just invaded our school system. And in Seattle and in other places across the country, this is how they deal with students who have trauma. They're building a new $200 million youth jail about 5 blocks from the high school where I teach. And so the message that gets sent clearly is, we have hundreds of millions of dollars to cage you, but we don't have the money to keep all the teachers in your school. This week it was just announced they're getting rid of the health teacher and the PE teacher at my school, right? The one place where students learn about consent and sexual assault that we clearly need much more education on, as you only have to see what's happening at the highest level of our government with, our president is a proud, boasts about sexual assaulting women, and now the Kavanaugh hearings. We clearly need those classes, and yet they're being cut from my school because in the city of Amazon and Starbucks and Boeing and Microsoft, there just isn't enough money to somehow to keep those classes, right? And so this is their plan for our youth. Warehouse them in this youth jail. And there's one more part of the school to prison pipeline I want to talk about before I transition to talk about this great movement that's challenging all that. And this is high stakes standardized testing that I've spent a lot of time organizing against and moving towards alternatives to. But the average American public school student today takes 112 standardized tests. And many of these tests have severe consequences attached to them. You probably took a lot yourselves. I don't know if they have to take SAT to come in. That's excellent. A lot of colleges are beginning to drop SAT and ACT because there's such poor predictors of how well you'll do in college, actually, right? Your ability to sit down and take one long test on whatever happened to be on the test that day does not talk about your intelligence. It doesn't reflect your ability to interact with other people and your professor to figure out how to think critically and deeply about issues. And so a lot of colleges are actually dropping that requirement, which is good. But there is a study that was recently conducted that shows that exit exams requiring kids to pass high stakes standardized tests to graduate from high school actually increased the likelihood that a student would end up in prison, because it decreases graduation rates, right? And then it decreases your chance of getting a job, and then that increases your chance of ending up in prison. And so students around the country, this is a student in Chicago marching against the over-testing and explicitly linking it to part of the school-to-prison pipeline. And so now I want to talk about what this Black Lives Matter at School movement is all about, and how it got started. And it's really an incredible story, and I'm just so amazed and honored to be part of this struggle that started in Seattle and is swept the country. It began at an elementary school in Seattle, not far from where I live. And teachers were getting together over the course of several years to engage in professional development that was about figuring out how to bring anti-racism into the school, right? Into their curriculum, into their policy, and they had been doing a lot of really good professional development. And they decided 2 school years ago that they wanted to do an event where they celebrated the Black lives of their kids at their school. And so they partnered with a community organization in Seattle called Black Men United to Change the Narrative. And this group came, the plan was for this group to come to the school with a lot of the parents out front and all the teachers, and they would high-five the kids as they came in to school, and they would have an assembly, and they would do certain themes about Black life and Black history that they would celebrate. And this was going to happen in September, not just in February. You don't have to relegate only talking about Black people to the shortest month of the year, right? We can do it. They wanted to show you could do it at the beginning of school. And the art teacher at John Muir developed an incredible shirt. This is the new version, but the older version said, "Black Lives Matter, we stand together," with the picture of a tree that she designed in the middle. And the idea was that all the teachers would wear these shirts that said Black Lives Matter to school to really demonstrate to the students their commitment. Well, the news found out the teachers were going to wear Black Lives Matter shirts to school, and it got reported. And then guess what happened, right? Yeah, the Blue Lives Matter group found out about it, and it went on their website, and then, you know, a whole slew of right-wing hate mail came into the school. And then some particularly hateful person ordered a bomb threat on an elementary school, saying they were going to blow up the school if teachers came to school wearing these shirts. Horrifying. So, you know, the school district canceled the event officially and said it wasn't going to happen as a response to the bomb threat. But the teachers and the parents and the organization, they carried out the event anyway. It was smaller than it would have been, right? It would have been this huge celebration. And so I was deeply disturbed by that, and I contacted the teachers there and said, what can we do to support you in this struggle? And we had a meeting with a bunch of teachers from the social equity educator group that I organize with, and we came up with an idea that what if all the teachers, what if every school, we all came to school wearing Black Lives Matter shirts, because they couldn't bomb threat every school. So let's pick a day and we all do it. So we were really excited about this idea. But we also were like, yeah, but how many teachers are really going to do this? So we took a resolution to our union, and we thought it would be a good fight. It would be a way to show our support for this school. We'll probably lose, but at least it'll raise the consciousness that this is an important struggle. And we were amazed when it passed unanimously. It was especially one teacher who spoke about her experience dealing with racism that helped the resolution pass. And then we said, okay, it passed, but how many are going to wear this shirt when October 19th comes and our day of action? And then the t-shirt orders started streaming in, first by the hundreds and then the thousands. And we had over 3,000 teachers in Seattle, of a district around 5,000, come to school wearing these Black Lives Matter shirts that day. And importantly, not just the shirts was part of the action, but actually teaching lessons about institutional racism that day. Showing films about the Black Lives Matter movement was part of that day. And a big part of the inspiration was the Garfield High School football team. I don't know if people saw this picture, but it was in Time magazine. And I think a big reason why the teachers actually voted unanimously and then actually by the thousands did this is because they saw their students taking a stand, or in this case, taking a knee for justice, right? And you know, when our students revolted, this was one of the first high schools in the country where the entire team took a knee in protest of police violence during the national anthem. And you know, when Garfield football players took a knee, then the marching band took a knee and the cheerleaders took a knee. All the coaches joined them. And then it spread to the girls volleyball team and the girls softball team as well. And it spread to a bunch of other high schools across Seattle. And that was all in the build-up to our action. And I think it played a huge role in teachers saying, we want to be part of this. Our students are speaking. Our students are acting on their beliefs. We have to too. And this is what it looked like at my school on Black Lives Matter at School Day. We assembled on the front steps and rallied during lunchtime. And then we went back into our classrooms and taught about the school-to-prison pipeline and taught about Black history. And it was a really joyous revolt against the racism that we've been dealing with for too long. And this teacher, Janet Dubois, revealed to us right there in that moment for the first time to the entire school that her son was killed by police. And she hadn't shared it because she didn't know how people would react. Is he then think of him as a criminal, and would she be supported? Right? But when she saw everyone wearing the Black Lives Matter at School shirts, she felt that she had a real community and that she could unburden herself with this trauma that she'd been carrying around and nobody knew. And that was a life-changing moment, and it changed the whole culture at our school. We were fighting for Black lives, not just because of what happened in Ferguson, right, but because of what happened to the teacher down the hall from you. And look, every school, like Lowell Elementary on their reader board, as you drive by, Black Lives Matter at School here, right? All these different schools had boards up inside where students could write down what Black Lives Matter means at their school. And then it spread to Philly. They saw us on the news, and the Philadelphia teachers decided they needed to do it too. So they expanded our Black Lives Matter at School Day and made it a week of action that same year. And then it spread to Rochester. Teachers there decided to do it as well. And then after that incredible year of explosion of activism, we said we need to actually organize this nationally. So last year was the first time it was a coordinated national effort. And we came together around 3 demands across the country: end zero tolerance discipline and replace it with restorative justice practices. So that's about stopping the disproportionate rates of suspension and expulsion, right? Mandate Black history and ethnic studies programs that teach the real history of Black people, and hire more Black teachers. Since 2002, 26,000 Black teachers have been pushed out of schools. We have a much wider workforce in teaching now over the last several decades. Things like Hurricane Katrina that wiped out the public school system in New Orleans. They ended up replacing the public schools with all charter schools, and replacing the unionized, more Black workforce with mostly Teach for America, more white teachers. There's a lot of other examples of how the teaching force has been whitened across the country. So we came together around these demands, and in over 20 cities across the country, thousands of teachers rallied around these demands, held assemblies and workshops, and taught lessons each day of the week for the entire week that corresponded to the 13 principles of the global Black Lives Matter network, right? So on Monday, we taught lessons about restorative justice. On Tuesday, we taught lessons about the African diaspora and black globalism. On Wednesday, we taught lessons all about black LGBTQ issues. On Thursday, we taught lessons about the global village and the black family. And on Friday, we taught lessons about black women. And every day of the week, hundreds and literally tens of thousands of kids across the country got a completely different education in this movement. And now, for the first time, recently we got the endorsement of the National Education Association, the biggest union in the country representing teachers. And we finally have some institutional support now. And I'm really excited to see what comes in this February. The first week of February is Black Lives Matter at School Week nationally. And we're going to be trying to build it up as big as we can. And it would be amazing to see it spread into higher education, into colleges and universities. And I think we should talk about what that could look like here and in other places as well. So we're getting close to time. But okay. But I just want to say that this struggle for black education has a long, long history, right? It's exciting to be in the midst of this growing movement now, but in order to figure out where we're going, we got to look back at where we've been. And every movement for racial justice in the history of this country has had an important educational component to it. You can start with slavery. When clandestine black literate slaves would go off and educate other slaves illegally, right? They called it stealing a meeting. And they would organize themselves in the dead of night to pass on literacy skills to others because they saw it as crucial in the fight for abolition. There's many ways, right? If you were able to read and write, you could forge a traveling document and help you escape, right? So literacy from people like Frederick Douglass that taught himself how to read and write and then ended up creating one of the most important newspapers, the North Star, in order to agitate across the country to get rid of slavery. You can look at Reconstruction after the Civil War, when the first public schools in the South started because of freed slaves who said, what is freedom if we can't read and write, right? What is freedom if we don't have an education? How can we advance? And they set up schools across the South that were beneficial for black children for sure, but it was the first time a lot of white children ever got a free public education as well. And it's incredible to see photos in the Deep South in the 1860s of black and white children sitting next to each other in school getting an education together that was, abolished when Jim Crow came. And you wouldn't see that again. In some places, you still won't see it to this day, right? But education was critical to the fight during Reconstruction against institutional racism. You look at the civil rights movement, a lot of people place the origins of that in the Brown versus Board of Education decision in the fight to desegregate the schools. And people should know that that wasn't just a Supreme Court decision that was argued narrowly by lawyers, but it was actually a black girl who led a walkout at her school against the unequal funding of black and white schools that led to that court case, right? And then you had the freedom schools that happened where the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee set up freedom schools across the South where kids would come and learn and even some adult schools as well, about the things that mattered most in their life. And the final exam wasn't a high-stakes standardized test. It was go register to vote and get other people to register, right? And then you had the Panthers Liberation Schools as the Black Power movement developed, where students learned about organizing for liberation in school and how to get free, rather than this Eurocentric curriculum. And so it's always been, education has always been central to the fight for racial and social justice in this country. You know, my stepdad took this picture at the University of Washington as they were protesting for a Black History department, and my dad attended the University of Wisconsin and was there in 1968 and 69 when the whole campus shut down. The students led a strike for Black History program, and they called in the National Guard, who cracked heads and tear gassed their own students. And that is why we had that legacy of student struggle to demand that we get to learn the full history of our people, right? And to see education not just as a personal advancement, but as a collective endeavor that's about liberation. That struggle that these students carried out in the 60s and 70s is why we have places like this right here. The Institute for Racial and Social Justice and Civic Engagement, right? Those kind of ideas came out of those mass student movements. And so what we're involved in today is about deciding what function education will play in our society and what role the schools will play. Is it about reproducing institutional racism, or is it about undermining injustice and racism and having schools be about helping students develop their full humanity and about identifying problems in the world so that we can organize collectively to fight and to solve them? And that's the struggle that I'm in, and it was a pleasure getting to share it with you all today. So thank you so much.